We recently just watched the ending of the very first in-season tournament in the NBA, and my very first thought after seeing all of this happen is that I am very pleasantly surprised. When the in-season tournament was first announced, I feel like I had a similar opinion of a lot of different people where it was like, what's even the point of all of this if it's literally just extra games being added to the regular season? And that wasn't, of course, until we found out that these games would be integrated into the regular season. They would just have a different meaning. And we were still a little bit confused about what the point of all of this even was, but after actually seeing it go down and actually happen, I feel like it was definitely a step in the right direction for just the NBA in general, but also just for NBA fans and people watching the NBA and trying to get into basketball. And it's really for one big reason, and it's something that people have kind of had in the back of their minds for as long as I can remember. The NBA's regular season is really up and down for the most part, but there's a lot more ups than downs, and those take place in about the same months every single season. Usually in about October, November, we're getting excited for any new teams or any new roster changes that have happened, and we get to see those finally play out as we had been waiting on since the start of the offseason most times. So that carries on until about mid-November, where we kind of have a good idea of what each team is going to look like for the rest of the season and kind of where they're going to end up. Obviously it's still early, but that gives us a good idea of what the identities of these teams actually are. But as we get into December, it's just getting into the middle of the season. There's really nothing even going on other than the Christmas Day games, and that's only one day. But then as you get into January, you start to have a bunch of trade rumors and things like that popping up. Will this team blow it up? Will this dude actually request a trade? Things like that. And then as you get into February or early February, all of those trades eventually happen, or at least most of them, hopefully. And then you have a second burst of excitement based on these new moves that have just happened. And that carries over into March, where the playoff race starts heating up. You start to see a lot of these teams kind of settle into where their playoff seeding is actually going to be. You have the fighting for different playoff spots. You have the fighting for play-in spots. And then obviously in April, that's when the real show starts. And as you can tell, there's a big gap in excitement and overall interest that takes place in around that December area. And so I feel like this was definitely created with that in mind. And if that was their goal, then they definitely did a good job, because these were some of the most entertaining regular season games that I've ever seen this early in the season. And it didn't feel like some stupid gimmick the entire time. It actually felt like every team was taking this seriously, or at least the teams that could actually compete. Like some of these games actually felt and sounded like playoff games at times.
Loose ball. Here comes the beat. Got numbers. To White for the lead. Vivian Durant. Big turn up. And don't you be late.
Burton, the inbounder. They have to work quickly here. Throws in straight away. It's healed. Goldstrom. His pass broke it up. Halliburton ahead of the field. Neesmith.
Not only that, but it also served as a spotlight for some of the teams that wouldn't have gotten that recognition in the first place. Mainly the Indiana Pacers, who took full advantage of this entire event. The Indiana Pacers, who coming into the season had just one scheduled national TV game, are now all of a sudden one of the most talked about teams in the sport, thanks to their play in their 7 games, where they had beaten some great contending teams such as the Philadelphia 76ers, the Boston Celtics, and the Milwaukee Bucks. A lot more people actually realize how crazy this team actually is, and they also, of course, learn how crazy Tyrese Halliburton is. I recently made a video about all of this, so if you want to, you can go check that out after this one. We got a bunch of crazy moments, some of which I am still haunted by, but in terms of just pure excitement, once again, this was a success. But as many positives as this first cup actually had, there were some things that a lot of people want to see changed. Fans and media and NBA personnel alike. And some people around the league have proposed multiple changes that they would like to see. Some people complained about the point differential and the kind of play that sort of resulted as that was such a huge factor. Some players loved it, but at the end of the day, if you're in a group with a really bad team, then you could probably be competitive compelled to kind of run up the score as much as humanly possible. And that's kind of the issue that a lot of these people are actually talking about, where people around the league and also Adam Silver himself have mentioned the idea of perhaps having a point differential cap per game. So say you're only allowed a 25 point differential per game, and that would probably help with just fixing some of those games that maybe were not so fun. So for some of those rebuilding teams that had absolutely no chance in this at all. Anyway, that was one of the proposed changes. In contrast, there are people that want the point differential factor to just be eliminated altogether and replace it with something like points allowed, for instance, which was something that was brought up, but it kind of goes against the product that you've been trying to create over the last few seasons with all these rule changes and things like that, to try to have these games where teams are scoring the most points possible and creating a more offensive centric game. All of a sudden, teams like the Pacers, who made it all the way to the championship game, would be at a crazy disadvantage because of the amount of points that they allow on a game-to-game basis. And they are winning a lot of these games, but because they would be allowing so many points, they would be at a disadvantage even though they would be winning. And so I can see that kind of being an issue if that is the direction that they want to go in. One of the other changes that was proposed was counting the amount of quarters a team won and using that as a tie-breaking factor. But the issue with that would be those weird games where you completely smoke the other team in one quarter, but then they win the other three by 3 or 4 points each, and then all of a sudden you lost 3 quarters even though you smoked the team in the whole game. And so it definitely becomes a lot more complicated if those are the routes that you want to go down, but obviously they do still have positives to them and people that support them, obviously, if they're getting brought up. I feel like point differential is just the direction that I want to see this thing going in, but maybe making that change that was suggested earlier with the point cap. I do also have some changes that I've been kind of thinking about as this tournament has been going on. I feel like some of these games should be a little bit later in the season, maybe into late December, early January. However, obviously that puts you in direct competition with the NFL playoffs, and I think that is something that they have in their back of their minds, and that's why they scheduled all these games so early and they scheduled them where they did. They do not want to be fighting with the NFL for viewership, and I also feel like that was kind of one of the factors that was fundamental in just this whole tournament existing in the first place, because that's when they lose a lot of their viewership. I do think that they could push these games back a little bit further and be fine. Obviously, once you get past Christmas and New Year's and into mid-January, that's when things start picking it back up again. And so you don't really need to go that far. I've seen some people talking about having the championship game like towards the trade deadline. I don't think that it needs to be that late, just until these trade rumors every season start picking back up around mid-January, around there. Because at the end of the day, it's a long season. It's an 82 game season. And that's something that you hear a lot of people talking about when they're commentating these games. It's like, it gives some of these games just a little bit more meaning, and it gives them actually something to play for in these earlier months. And this has been one of the best seasons in recent memory with this tournament, and also just the rules about who can rest games and when they can rest games. They can't rest during national TV games and things like that. Kawhi Leonard has played in every single game this season. Do you know how ridiculous that is? Like, the NBA is in a good spot right now. Another idea that I had, not really idea, but another suggestion that I had, and that a lot of other people have had, bro, these courts do not need to look like this. The designs, I think, are perfectly fine. Like, they were great in making the game feel more special, which is, I think, exactly what they were going for. But the colors do not need to be this bright. I feel like if the floor was just tinted with these colors, then it would accomplish the same thing without being so over the top. And also, bro, why is our court brown? Where is there brown in our logo? Where is there brown in our jerseys? Who came up with this? I digress. I feel like it is definitely way better that they went this route rather than some of the other solutions or some of the other proposals that have been floating around the last few seasons, where, like, I've seen some people talking about shortening the season by 20 games or shortening to 65, something like that. The thing that you need to think about is the amount of money that this league is going to lose by getting rid of 17 games from 30 teams. That is over $250 50 games that they would be losing out on. So that was never even gonna be a possibility. I feel like this is the perfect solution. Obviously, it wasn't perfect, but I feel like this was definitely a success. And obviously, like I said, it's not perfect, but for a first season attempt, this is definitely a good place to start. And I definitely hope to see this more in future seasons. But that's about it for me. I want to know what you guys thought about this tournament and what changes you think should be made. And also, do you think the prize was worth it? $500,000 per player, which may not seem like a lot, but for a lot of the lesser paid dudes down on the end of the bench, it definitely makes a huge impact. That number is probably subject to change given that the NBA is about to have a huge deal coming up. And so maybe that prize money will change, but we'll see. But with all that being said, I hope you guys enjoyed this video. Subscribe if you're new. Hit the bell to be notified when I upload. Comment down below what you want to see next. And as always, I'll see you guys in the next one.